Retro.
Hello there. This is James Arnold Taylor, the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Their behavior is continuously unexpected. So uncivilized.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And this episode will feature our discussion of The High Republic, Into the Light by Claudia Gray. So before we start discussing the book, Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody what our social media contacts are?
Sure thing, Dennis. We are on Facebook and Instagram conveniently at Podcast Stardust.
Okay, the dish is aligned, the signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, we're now broadcasting to the galaxy. So this is our discussion of Into the Light. It was written by Claudia Gray. It is the last young adult novel in the High Republic, the second to last novel overall in the High Republic and Phase 3. Can't believe we're here already.
Right.
And this will be a full spoiler discussion. So this came out, when? May, I'm going to say?
April or May, one of the two.
Right. Yeah. So it's been a while. I hope you've all had an opportunity to read it. But if not, then and if you don't want to be spoiled, now is your chance to jump out and come back later. But let's start off with a few non-spoiler thoughts about this book overall. Jay, what is your initial impressions of this?
I really, really enjoyed this book. And I don't know if it's just because I have always appreciated Claudia Gray's writing, or if it's because the characters themselves, somehow I just feel like I resonate well with a lot of them in this book. And it's so wonderful to see the journeys that they've taken, especially, you had talked about this once before, but Reath Silas and his character arc is amazing. To see the evidence of new enlightenment, I guess you could say, of things like Kashyyyk, the planet itself, the culture, insights into the Force. I mean, there was a lot of things in this that I really appreciated. Obviously, there's not a focus on things like so much of the Nihil Markian Rose is missing from most of this book and that type of thing. But in the beginning was a little slow for me, but overall, I feel like this was a great book. It's actually probably in my top 5.
Wow.
And I would say in the High Republic.
Okay. Yeah. That's, I don't think that's a stretch to rank it there. I haven't really thought about where I'd rank it amongst all of them, but what I would say is that one of the things that I really appreciate about this is that you really come to understand how good a writer Claudia Gray really is. Whether or not you like the Star Wars story she's telling, she is a good writer. She does a good job. I found this book it was a smaller scale than some of the adult novels on things that were happening. It was much more localized to one place. We weren't doing a whole lot of planet hopping and that type of stuff, but it told a compelling story. It was easy to follow from start to finish. And I don't think that's just because it's a young adult novel, which might be intended to be easier to follow than an adult novel, which I don't think is the case necessarily. But she kept you engaged with all the characters. Or at least the main ones. You didn't forget that they were around because she gave them all their equal time. And at the end of this, you come to appreciate the journeys that a lot of these characters were on. And so, again, being vague, but I'm trying to be non-spoiler in this just so that people want to get our thoughts before we get into the real discussion, they can on this. But is it my top 5 of the High Republic novels? I don't know. I'd have to really sit down and think about them. But this is a good book. It is definitely one of my favorite Star Wars books that she's written. And I liked most of everything that she's done in Star Wars here. But this I thought was a good addition to the story. It does wrap up some of the plot lines that are in the High Republic. There's a few things here that we won't see again and that's fine. Their stories told that, and that's been included, and we don't need to revisit some of those things. So, I'm very favorable towards this one.
Yes, and to your point too with Claudia Gray, she's got a lot of things to keep track of. I mean,
Uh-huh.
all of the High Republic authors have, because as you get more and more into all of the storylines and the way that everything is tied together. But I mean, she's got things from all of the other types of phases, as well as the comics, and just wow, everything. And she does it very well.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, so there are our non-spoiler thoughts. Hope you've or hope that helped if you haven't read the book yet. If you're on the fence about whether to read or not, we definitely encourage you to go do so. But now we're going to go ahead and get into some of the details and get further into our discussion. So I'll go ahead and just kind of kick things off with what the setting of this book, what's all about here, Jay. And that is that the blight is discovered on Kashyyyk. And the Jedi Order, particularly Jedi Council, decides to send Reath Silas to investigate this because, well, he is kind of the leading expert among the Jedi when it comes to the blight. He's done the most studying into it. Amadeo Zazo, who is the masterless Padawan, is kind of latched onto Reath, and so he brings him. Buryaga and Kelnaka are the Jedi Wookiee representatives that come with Reath. And then we've got Vitus Comac, and then Des Ryden has finished his Barrage Vow, who is also a kind of a Jedi brother to Reath. They had the same Jedi Master.
Mhm.
And then we also get Avon Staros, Affie Hollow, Leox Gyasi, and Geode of the Vessel. Azlin Rell, the Fallen Jedi, is on this mission. And then Nan Hauge, the former Nihil, is along for the ride as well. Making things complicated is that we've got Dr. Mkampa of the Nihil, and she has managed to exert some control of the Drengir and cause them to violate their truce with the Jedi. And she's driven them to Kashyyyk, where she is looking for a Sith artifact. And so, yeah, that kind of sets things up. But where do you want to start here, Jay? We got a lot of different plot points going on between the Jedi investigation on what's going on in Kashyyyk, the introduction of the blight that's there, stuff going on with Nan, Dr. Mkampa, Marchion Ro, and the Nile. The Drengir, where do you want to start with our discussion?
Well, I guess with the players that are in the entire thing here, because we've got quite the hodgepodge, I guess you could say, of
Mm-hmm.
characters that are coming to Kashyyyk to work together. And then of course you've got Nan, who is under the guise of being helpful, but yet she is a Nile spy. And so you're kind of following her whole storyline, wondering where she's eventually going to land. But I appreciated the fact that you've got this team, as you mentioned, that has a couple of Wookiee Jedis. You've got some other Jedi that have some experience with the blight itself. And then you've got this young Avon Staros, who is just a supercomputer in and of herself. And then you have someone like Azlin Rell, which I have to say, when we were introduced to Azlin in the High Republic, and then eventually what happens in the comics with him and his turn to the dark side, and even though Yoda almost kind of supported him. I wouldn't say supported him in that, but he didn't completely cut him off from that. Aslan was probably my surprise standout, almost favorite character in this
Really?
entire book. I love his moral ambiguity, and I love the fact that he wants to be bad and he wants other people to like be bad with him, but yet he's entertaining the idea of the light still. And I don't know, I just think that teeter-totter that he was on the whole time, and the fact that he actually used force lightning at one point when he was falling down through the trees was amazing. But kind of I digress. Let's get back to
Well,
the
let's actually
characters
focus
themselves.
on him here, since
Okay.
you've, as opposed to let's kind of get off the surface level and dive into the details. And since you brought up Aslan Rell, let's talk about him a little bit, because you're right. We first met him in the Edge of Balance manga comics, and so back in phase 2. And basically his experience with the Drengir is kind of drove him mad and caused him to gouge out his eyes. And then he fell to the dark side. And as you were alluding to, Yoda found him and brought him back to the Jedi as kind of like the dark side expert and everything
Right.
here, because they didn't understand what was going on with the Nameless. The blight wasn't even a thing when they found him, but Yoda's comprehension of the Force suggested that this guy would be helpful. And of course, one of the first things Azlin Rell does is cause an entire community to get destroyed in an attempt to save the Jedi from the Nameless. Here, one of the things that stood out to me is that when he gets to Kashyyyk, he's having all these memories from when he was a kid, a youngling, and the Jedi kind of came here as a field trip.
Mm-hmm.
And and it's like, it's bringing him joy. Like, this is one of the things that he finds himself smiling, like
Right.
not forced and not in a way of creeping anybody out. And he kind of forgot how to do that here. And then, as you allude to, he also is kind of feeling the light and the dark of this planet here. But what else about his journey stands out to you?
Well, I just think he's such a bridge between the light and the dark. And it I think it encompasses the struggle that a lot of people have just internally anyways, with the light and the dark within them, which I know is kind of philosophical in that way. But as far as, just in the High Republic itself, he's so unique in the way that he's got this mission to destroy the Nameless and then now the Blight, and he remains kind of entangled in the dark side. But and he claimed, but and he's not Sith, but his methods are definitely Sith like. And everyone else is looking at him like they don't know how to take him. You know, it's almost like they're intrigued by him, but also afraid of some of the things that he might do. But yet, the first person to always stand up for him is Reath. And
Mm-hmm.
I dig that about Reath. Like he's seeing that Azlin is still above and beyond anything else. He is a a being of consequence, and he deserves every chance to prove himself. And even though Reath doesn't maybe necessarily 100% trust him, I just really appreciate the interactions that they have with each other, and just the fact that, Aslan ends up coming through for them.
Yeah, Reef is mature beyond his years because he's like, what, 18 or so around this time? 18, maybe 20, pushing 20. I can't remember exactly how old he is, but he's a very
Yeah,
young
he's
Jedi Knight
young. Mhm.
in all this. It's been 3 years since we met him. And I want to say he was about 15 when we met him in Into the Darkness. But he knows what Aslan is, which is he is a former Jedi. He's been corrupted by the dark side, but Reith doesn't have this foolish hope that he's going to be able to redeem Aslan to the light. And he's not even trying to do that. It's that, Aslan is who Aslan is. And he's on guard for all of Aslan's tricks. As you pointed out
Mhm.
that,
Mhm.
Aslan kind of wants someone to follow the dark side. And Reith has this observation. It's like, you want someone to follow the dark side so that you won't be alone in
Right.
the dark side here. Because at one point he's like, Master Comac catches Aslan asking some uncomfortable questions to Amadeo Zazo and kind of steps in. And then Reith kind of feels like Comac has kind of stepped on his toes a bit. And so, Reith is like, I got this here. And the thing is, but to balance all this out, it's like Reith understands what Aslan is, but he doesn't let people get away with making Aslan out to be more of a monster than what he is.
Mhm.
Because when everyone else is objecting to Aslan even being on this mission, Reith is like, he can be useful. I'm responsible for him. He's not this guy bent on corrupting you all, gaining power, and they're wise. Everyone else is wise to be leery of him because he has fallen to the dark side. But Reith has got the experience with Aslan to say, like, I'm used to his tricks. I'm used to him trying to manipulate me here. I'm not going to fall for it, and I'm not going to let you all make the situation worse than what it is on
Mhm.
that. So yeah, I really like the way that Reith handled everything when it came to Aslan. in this.
Absolutely. And one last thought too, I think that this particular era of the Jedi is so unique in that they would even entertain, as I was saying, like Yoda kind of supported Aslan and tried to help him, through some of this that was happening, especially with the torture that he went through. And, that fell by the wayside so much later, to the point where, even as Obi-Wan says, only a Sith deals in absolutes. Well, that's exactly what the Jedi were doing.
Mhm.
Either you were on the light side or you were on the dark side. And there was no in between. But yet here they are working with this very morally conflicted, ambiguous kind of person, and seeing benefit in that. And I think
Yeah,
that is just a shining part of these stories.
right. And if you compare Aslan to someone like Anakin, Anakin fell to the dark side because it was a very selfish reason, and that he did it because he was promised the power to keep Padme from dying. And Anakin's love for Padme was a very possessive type of a love. It was this very selfish goal. I guess you could kind of look at Aslan having a selfish goal as well, which was he fell to the dark side to get the power to protect himself from the nameless.
Hmm.
And he's abused that power several times. He blew up a community. But at the same time, it's like he's also got this protection motivation there. But it's not as at least at this stage, it's not as grandiose as what Anakin was doing. Because once Anakin lost everything and lost Padme, he helped Palpatine conquer the galaxy. Anakin took out his loss on everybody. And this, he hated himself, he hated everybody, he hated everything that reminded him of his past life, and he became twisted and evil. And meanwhile, Aslan's a bit more contained in that
Hmm.
regard, which is, it's like he's doing things to protect himself. And I'm not condoning the fact that he destroyed that community like the first time we saw him in the comics,
Oh, for
but
sure.
he doesn't have these grandiose conquer the galaxy type of motivation there. Um, but we spent like 10 minutes on Aslan, so we should probably move along here in a second. Any other final thoughts on him before we move on?
I just dig his character, and
Yeah.
I'm glad that Claudia Gray showed us more into his inner mind.
Hmm. Let's go ahead and talk about Nan here, because she's kind of the other outsider in this group, and that way that she's a former Nile. Everyone knows that she's a former Nile, and she shows up on Coruscant claiming to be defecting from the Nile, even though she'd been sent there as a spy by Marchion Ro. What is your take on Nan?
Well, she's so obviously another one of those that's very ambiguous in what she's doing, where her loyalties are. She's afraid of Marchion Ro. I mean, that was the whole reason why she had agreed to continue to quote unquote work for him. And obviously it goes all the way back to the Maxine station. And, but she starts to realize as she's working with this group that, there's much more to this whole life than just being the spy, but she's afraid not to do that. But yet she ends up being, saved, quote unquote, and is eventually part of the crew.
Hmm.
And, so I think her journey is one that was um here and there it was a little like, yeah, okay, whatever, annoying, but it's clear she definitely had a crush on Reath. He was very crushed on by a few different young ladies in this book, or a couple at least. But there was also that history that Nan had with Reath too, going back to the Maxine station. So there was that trust issue that Reath definitely had with Nan, which understandably so. So she was all over the place. I did enjoy her character, and I am glad that she ended up where she did with, Leox Jassy and the whole group.
Yeah. So I actually I've read the book twice now, and I understood her a lot better the second time around than I did the first. And that is my own failing, not a failing of the writing here. And I think it's because I kind of brought in a prejudice against Nan, who's someone I did not like after what she did in Into the Darkness.
Hmm.
But she redeemed herself, as far as I'm concerned, as a character in here, because she's explaining her motivations to Reath at the end of the novel. And it's, she's being challenged by Reath about the choices she's made. And I think some of this actually comes up with, in some conversations with Affie Hollow. And what she says is that, when my parents were killed and she was taken in by Hauge, who I believe was a Brak, and we got to meet him in Into the Darkness. But he cared for her. No one else would when she was orphaned as a small child. And then they scraped by for whatever they had to get. Marchion was promising a galaxy of opportunity. And, so where the Nihil, anybody could join the Nihil. Anyone could have these opportunities and they could make a name for themselves, build a life, etc. But then somewhere along the way, she realized that, he's a politician in that regard. He's making these promises, but the Nihil are just kind of a plaything for Marchion Ro. And so she decided that, while she's not a convert to the Republic, this Nihil way of life is not for her. She kind of talks about how you can't just share things with others in the Nihil. You can't share emotions and feelings because you get used against you and the like. Whereas this group that she's with here, she sees them regularly saying things to each other, that being open with each other in a way that she never could with the Nihil. And then the other motivation she has is that she came to realize that Dr. Mkampa arranged for her and these other Nihil ships to get caught up in the emergencies way back in phase 1, and with the goal of some of them getting stranded near the Amaxine station because she believed that the Drengir were there, and if any of the Nihil were there, then they could potentially stumble upon the Drengir and reactivate them. She didn't care who it was. All those other Nihil ships got destroyed, and it was only by luck that Nan and Hauge survived all of this. And so, part of her motivation was to get revenge against Mkampa. And so, she really realized how hypocritical this entire Nihil movement was this entire time. And while she's still resentful towards the Republic, and she wasn't joining it, she was willing to move on in a different type of life. So again, I found her story to be very sympathetic. I liked her character a whole lot more after this. And even, the way she's kind of being accepted a bit more by Affie and the crew of the vessel there, begrudgingly. But anyways, she was accepted begrudgingly, but they kind of saw, this is a person who didn't set out to be evil. She made some bad choices, but she did redeem herself over the course of the book.
Right. No, I think that's a great way to sum up her character, honestly. And I think, Affie probably saw a little bit of a kindred spirit too in Nan, once she was able to kind of open up to her and understand what Nan had also gone through. And I think that Nan, as you said too, she kind of had that roadblock, if you will, of where her trust was and how things, played out. And she was able to see, as you said, how they were able to be open with each other. Did you get the feeling, just real quickly, with Marchion Ro, like I don't think he really trusts anybody 100%, but he seemed to put quite a bit of faith in Nan as a spy. Do you feel that too?
Yeah, yes and no. I see. I had the benefit of having read Trials of the Jedi, and so
Gotcha.
I know
Okay.
where a lot of things, and so I'm trying to be careful what I say, so that I don't give things away. And I ultimately know what Marchion's motivation is for doing everything that he's done here, but yeah, one of the observations that Nan makes is that she's thinking of Gira Staros about how in Mkampa that Marchion just kind of uses up all these people. They're used. He promotes them up, and then he kills them off on a whim at some point. And so it's kind of surprising to Nan that Gira Staros hasn't suffered that fate yet in this regard. And so I think she's wise, and her days are numbered in this organization, so she gets out while she can. Okay, well, let's catch up on some of the other things that are going here. The Drengir. I got to tell you, I was a little surprised when I saw how involved they were going to be in this book. And I wasn't, because they were such a big part of phase 1. But then as we got to see in Kevin Scott's High Republic comic, the Jedi essentially conquered them and put the Regenerator in stasis. Of course, that was on Starlight Beacon, which fell. And so they kind of got away. But they had kind of been relegated to a side role in this when they had a much bigger role in phase 1. But I love the fact that they got to Kashyyyk, and it was these plant monsters putting the Jedi aside against the Wookiees here. This other nature-bound species. I loved how they called them like the hairy meat beings, the way that the Drengir thought of the Wookiees there. But in a way, I generated some sympathy for them when I saw how
Yeah.
Dr. Mkampa was manipulating them, and then after that, exposed to the White Warshears at the end of the book, and then changed their ways there. They got redeemed to the light. But what did you think about the Drengir?
Well, it's really interesting the way that you say that, because I totally agree with you in the fact that I feel that the Drengir were much more personalized, if you will, in this book, because before we'd only ever known them to be, singularly motivated, meat, all of these things, and they were just consuming everything. They were evil. They were seen as, their own type of blight, if you will, on different planets, and with attacking people and just in general. And so, as you said, with Dr. Mkampa, and just understanding that they were a pawn in a lot of these things too, and that they actually have a history and
Mhm.
they have a culture, and they were basically a conduit for all of the evil things that Mkampa and the Nihil were trying to do. And having this hive mind that they had with the great progenitor, that basically unified their collective consciousness, and the way that the progenitor was also manipulated and distorted in that way. And the fact that it was actually even funny at one point too, because you get to quote unquote hear them having conversations in the way that Claudia Gray describes it, and
Mhm.
that when they're going to their ship and that they're consuming things, that they've learned to spit out inedible things like clothing so it doesn't clutter the ship. I just thought that that
Or it
was
scares their
or
victims. The
scares
next yeah.
scares their victims the next time around. But then
Yeah.
they realize that they don't have to be carnivores, and as you said, they're brought back to the light by this whole white Warsher tree, in the light side virgins of the Force here in Kashyyyk. And it was a very satisfying conclusion to their storyline.
Yeah, I couldn't help but wonder if some part of the Drengir discussion was autobiographical for Claudia Gray, because at one point, while they're having this revelation, when they get exposed to the lights, this massive blast of the light side of the Force from the White Warshare series, they see, the Dringers realize that they're going to put down roots and they'll never pollute themselves with meat again. And I was like, well, that's a very vegetarian thing to say. I wonder if Claudia Gray is a vegetarian. But
Oh gosh, I never thought of that. That's funny.
yeah, I that's pure speculation on my part. I didn't look it up. I don't know. And if she enjoys a good cheeseburger, then more power to her. I don't know. But but I couldn't help but wondering, back in the first young adult novel that Claudia Gray wrote, which was, Into the Darkness, where we got introduced to the Drengir, they are kept in check in some sort of a stasis using these Sith idols. And then, Reath and the other Jedi that are on a maxing station taken to Coruscant and kind of purify them then, and that's what allows the Drengir to get loose. And Mkampa figures out that she can manipulate light to the same frequency from wherever they're from, the solar system they're from, and they use a lot of ultraviolet, and that's how she can drive them to do things. And that's how she's been controlling them this entire time. And then there's this Sith storm seed that's there on Kashyyyk, and the white Warsher. I promise I'm going somewhere with all this, by the way. The white Warsher trees are this minority species of white Warsher that used to dominate the planet before they self went extinct, so that the other Warsher trees could have a chance. But they have this connection with the Force that allowed them to keep the power of the Sith thorn seed in check, which is full of dark side, and that thorn seed like pollutes the ground around it with dark side Force energies, and then the Sith would use it to make their poisons and things like that. And so, anyways, where I'm getting with all this is that I can't help but wonder if it wasn't the Sith that corrupted the Drengir in the first place on all of that, because
Mhm.
if did they encounter the Drengir in their home world, corrupted them for their own purposes, perhaps with storm seeds, And then the Drengir got out of control, and so they had to put the progenitor in stasis. And if it wasn't just that, because I can't buy the fact that the Sith were just doing something for the good of the galaxy. Here, that just
Right.
does not seem like them. It feels like this was a Sith experiment that went awry. Again, I'm kind of speculating here, but what do you think of that?
No, I think those are great speculations because I think that there's, pardon the pun, but there are seeds of, okay, as you said, well, how did this ever, become a thing in the first place? And how does these Sith artifacts factor into how the Drengir got to where they are today?
Mhm.
And so I think those are really good questions that definitely deserve some answers. And it would be, something that would be very interesting, I think, to dive into and look into, and where those origins actually come from. And I'm hoping that maybe those will actually be explored at a different time, that we're not completely just saying, oh yay, Drengir saved, yay, they're back to the light side, okay, we're done with the story. Like,
Yeah.
no, you know me, I like a good backstory, I want to know more.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree. I just don't like the way that the Drengir were wrapped up, as opposed to them all getting slaughtered. It's as you were talking about, we were seeing the Drengir's inner thoughts, and when they get exposed to that light side and like the magnificence of the white Rorshirs, because it's Buryaga that goes up to the Rorshirs and says, "Show through the Force says, show them who you are." And
Yeah.
so the Roshers do that. And then in that, bathing in that brilliance, the Drengir are like, how could we ever been so wrong about this? And so they put down the roots. They're no longer a mobile plant, and they kind of take over this well that the thorn seed used to inhabit, this whole island, and that's where they are now. And
Mhm.
it just is, I don't even use the word poetic because I'm not even sure that's it. It's just so fitting here. It's
It
such
is.
a nice force conclusion to their story in that regard.
Oh, I agree. And how much more rich is Kashyyyk to us now in terms of the role that it plays in the overall history
Yeah.
of, Star Wars? I mean, oh my gosh. And that all of these Wookiees, they knew how completely sacred this place is. And they
Mhm.
protected it with their lives, with their souls, and that only certain people were actually ever allowed to be involved with witnessing it. And so all of these people that were on this mission now are basically, relegated to secrecy for the rest of their lives. And so, you wonder if Wookiees like Chewbacca knew this tale, were they told this tale, and how much of this was passed down. And and you think about Wookiee Life Day, and is there more of, the orbs, the glowing orbs, kind of thing? Like, I'm
Mhm.
thinking, okay, is there a little bit more to that than what we thought we knew before?
Yeah, it's funny because at the beginning of this book, the Reath and Bel Zettifar, who's in a little bit of the book at the beginning, and Vernestra Rowe and Buryaga and the likes, they're all evacuating a planet that's fallen prey to the blight. And so they go back to Coruscant, and then there is this discovery. It's a planting day on Kashyyyk, where they're taking a Rorschach sapling that's in a place that's not conducive to growth, and then they pot it and then plant it someplace else. Otherwise, they like don't interfere with the Rorschachs here. And then this
Mhm.
one just happens to be infected with the blight. We know good and well that Kashyyyk is fine because, of course, we see it in the original trilogy sources and the
Right.
side sources and stuff like that. But I was really nervous for Kashyyyk that this planet was really going to get like put through the ringer because of the blight, and only to have
Mhm.
it cured at some point. And so it was at a great relief at the end of this book when the outpouring of light side energy is manages to push back the blight off of Kashyyyk. And I love how careful Claudia Gray is in explaining it's like this can only happen on Kashyyyk. We
Right.
cannot replicate this anywhere else. To the extent that the blight is going to be cured, it's going to be through a different means, which it is. Looking forward to Trials of the Jedi, but I won't spoil that.
Well, go ahead, finish your thought,
But
sorry.
yeah, it was like you're right. It was really cool to see this book set here. We get things from the perspective of like Avon is, they're going up and down the Rorshirs to see where the meditation circle is trying to keep the blight back in. And I can't remember the name of the cat-like creatures that they use as mounts to get up and down. And she's marveling at
Oh,
them.
yeah.
Then we get Azlin Rell's reflections on what it was like to go to Kashyyyk as a youngling, and he's reflecting on how far the Jedi Order's fallen because, like Amadeus Azo's Kresh got to go to Jakku as opposed to Kashyyyk for their little Jedi field trip. But then, just like the how everyone mentions like how deadly things are on the surface, and so like Avon and Nan, like, so they weren't sure if to look up, to look down, to look where, as things are going on.
Yeah.
And they just did such a good job making this planet so lush and rich throughout the course of the book.
Right, and not just lush and rich, but also, as you said, highlighting the dangers. It's not just beautiful, that there are things that are lurking behind and amidst every tree and bush, and you can't just ooh and ah at everything, and you have to, be careful. But, as you were talking too, I was wondering to myself, this light side nexus of energy, I wonder if Yoda knew about this and if this explains why such good relations with the Wookiees he has.
Hard to say. I mean, without
You
knowing, I
know?
mean, it's a possibility there, but yeah, I mean, I kind of doubt it because none of the Jedi knew about this, and the Wookiees only brought Geode into their confidence on this, and they brought him in deliberately as a neutral observer. So I don't know, but I mean, I don't know what Yoda's history prior to this was with the Wookiees. We just know he has one
Mhm.
at some point.
Mhm.
Um,
And poor
speaking,
Geode.
yeah, I was gonna say, speaking of Geode here, he sacrifices himself to destroy the thorn seed, which then allows the white Roshir trees to turn their abilities with the light side of the force back onto the Drengir and everything else, and which ends up curing the blight on Kashyyyk. I have a thought about Geode's sacrifice, but wanted to give you a chance to talk about it first. So, what did you think?
Oh my gosh. Well, let's just first of all appreciate the fact that Claudia Gray brought us a character who essentially is a rock. He's
Hmm.
this Vintian that appears indistinguishable from a rock, anyways, until people get to know him or beings get to know him. He's this silent navigator of the vessel, and all of these things. But he's always precisely in the right place at the right time.
Hmm.
And this is the epitome of that. And so we have gotten to know Geode so much more throughout the escapades throughout the High Republic. And he actually has an emotional importance, not only obviously to his team, but to the readers. And so I love the fact that his sacrifice embodies not only the idea that, giving up something for the greater good, and then you wonder about like where do Vintians go after they die?
Hmm.
And so then there's like this what is it, the Heartstone or
Yeah.
whatever? And so
Hmm.
now there's this potential resilience, almost like I am Groot, is what it reminds me of. Is like we thought we lost Groot, in the MCU, but yet he was able to grow from like a single splinter kind of a thing. So I don't know, I just love it. I love the bonds that he had with his crew, that they had on this mission, the fact that he's kind of both figuratively and literally a rock for everyone.
Mm.
And I just love his little character arc.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll start off by saying I love Geode. I think one of the greatest things about Geode is that, as you said, he shows up in the right place at the right time, and like he's attributed all of these like heroic actions, but we never actually see him do any of these things. Like with the storm seed here, he basically stares it down and absorbs his energy. The storm seed explodes, and so does he. We don't actually see him do anything. He just like shows up in the pit.
Right.
Similarly, it's like, I can't remember which one of the novels is that Affy is like concerned because he's a ladies' man. And there's like, where is Geode? Oh, he went to bed. Well, is he by himself? I mean, and the thing is like, we never actually we don't see him doing things like, Leox is like, I can't remember where they're docked, and, Geode's apparently out at the clubs. And Leox is like, well, he is kind of this wild man. At some point, he's going to have to settle down. It's the ongoing joke. I love it. It's great. And so, yeah, it was like, wow, they sacrificed Geode here. Or did they? They go through a whole funeral for this character, and Leox is explaining that they scatter the remains at the where the water meets the shore, because it's kind of like part of the Ventian life cycle, that his parts can become, that can be the basis for another being, et cetera, et cetera. And they have the Heartstone. That's all that's left. And they specifically make this comment that it's not enough for him to regenerate, that this heart. And so Leox and Affy are going to take turns wearing it so that some part of their friend can be with them. They're going to share Geode. But at the end of the novel, there's growth around this Heartstone, and we get the tie-in to all the themes of hope in Star Wars, where Leox says anything's possible through hope. Okay, fantastic. My only complaint is that by bringing back this possibility that I liked your analogy to Groot. I think that's spot on. I hadn't considered that. That's really good. But by bringing him back in this way, you just discounted his sacrifice here. And she did this in the Fallen Star with Leox. And that, he was going out, climbing out on the outside of the station to open up the doors, make sure everyone get it. And then he got sucked out, only for when, Affy is mourning his loss, he shows up and turns out he had a parachute on this. And so she has these characters make these heroic sacrifices, and then just turns around and discounts them right off the bat in the same book right there. And so part of me is just kind of like, I didn't want you to kill off Geode, but then you did, and you made that sacrifice, and then you just discounted it there. So I guess that's my criticism of the whole of that.
No, I totally get that. And I can see that for sure, because, we've talked about this before, that when you make a sacrifice like that, people don't, and in Geo's case, rocks, but characters don't always need to come back. There sometimes just needs to be that finality. And as you said, it really does solidify that sacrifice as a true sacrifice. So I can totally see where you're going with that.
Well, and I don't want this to sound like it's pejorative, because it's not, but it's just like, she can't kill off her darlings, which is the crew of the vessel. And, she teases their deaths and gets us all worked up about it. But then, as opposed to making that powerful move, she takes a step back from it. So at any rate, I like all these characters. I want to see more adventures with them, and it'll be curious to see what, if anything, they ever do with these. I can't believe that we're never going to get anything else set in the High Republic era again. But we are coming up on the conclusion of this, and I suspect that there's going to be other storytelling done in other eras before we get back to this. But who's to say? We don't, these characters, there's plenty of characters left after all of this for them to tell more stories about. So we'll see. I can tell you that the crew of the vessel is not in Trials of the Jedi. So as much of an all-star novel that is, their finale is here.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
That's good to know.
So, or at least I should say, they don't have any meaningful role in Trials of the Jedi. So, look, we're about out of time on this. I would like to talk about Reath a little bit more, because he did have a lot of growth from the cloistered Padawan that just wanted to work in the archives that we met in Into the Darkness, now to a Jedi who's talking about his experience. It took his master getting him out to see the galaxy before he realized how much there was to see, how much the galaxy had to offer, and how much he could grow, and how much he did grow in all of this. Fortunately, we'll get more of him in Trials of the Jedi by Charles Soule. So you're not done with him just yet. But yeah, any final thought you want to make before we wrap it up?
Well, I definitely echo everything that you said about Reath, and that was one of the things that I said at the very beginning, that his character arc through the entire High Republic has been so compelling. And as you said, this introverted, kind of rule-bound kid to this really capable Jedi. So it was a joy to witness that. One thing I just wanted to touch on just really quickly, and I almost missed it kind of in passing as I was listening, because I was listening and reading the book at the same time. But the little focus that the planet Kenari got in this book, that we, end up seeing obviously later as Cassian Andor's home planet. So I thought that was a very interesting tie-in.
I hated to laugh during that portion, but I did just because you had the guy that was from the Zerka Corporation,
Uh-huh.
which is a Old Republic reference, which I loved. They're trying to work out some deal to get the minerals, and then you had the translator who absolutely thought he was disgusting, not
Right.
not translating perfectly for him, just letting his disgust drip right off of him the entire time, and then the Drengir show up and eat them all. And so it was just kind of like the tone, the sarcasm, and the disgust that Claudia Gray infused in that scene. Just it was kind of like a horror novel, in that regards, right there. And I loved it. I just thought it was so fantastic. But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I did like the little Canary cameo that we got in this book
Mhm.
as well.
Mhm.
Okay. Well then, yeah, there's a lot more to discuss about this book, and I encourage, and sounds like you do too, Jay, to everyone to go out and read it if you haven't done so as well. It's like I said, Claudia Gray, she's a good writer, and this is well written. It's a good story. It's an adventure that really moves. So go check it out if you haven't done so
Mhm.
already.
Yes.
But with that said, thanks for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and our discussion of Into the Light. If you've enjoyed it and you want more of our coverage of Star Wars novels, we try to get to one every, 4 to 8 weeks or so, just depending on what's out.
Mhm.
Then make sure you subscribe to the show and you'll get those downloaded automatically for you on your podcatcher of choice. And once you've done that, we'd really appreciate a rating and review on your podcatcher that supports such things. And if you want to catch more of the show beyond what your podcatcher is going to have, then head over to directorsapp.com where you can find the entire catalog of the shows, all previous 921 of them, and a bunch of other great shows that are on the network as well. Jay, please give everyone our social media contacts once again and let them know where else we can be found online.
Absolutely. It is my pleasure, Dennis. We are at Podcast Stardust on all the usual suspects, including Facebook and Instagram. And you can also check out all of our Pinterest boards. And we are also on YouTube and YouTube Music as well. So please head over to all of those and like, subscribe, share those out, and let us know what you think of the episodes. And we also have a link in our show notes to our TeePublic store, which does have 7 different Podcast Stardust logo designs available on all kinds of things, from t-shirts to sweatshirts and home goods and pretty much everything in between. So once again, check out that link in our show notes.
All right. So, upcoming on the show on Friday, we are taking a look at the week's Star Wars news. And if there is none, then we'll find something else to cover. But it's been hit or miss a lot lately. And then on Monday, we're getting back into the Clone Wars with our rewatch, and we'll be looking at episode 15 from season 2. So make sure you join us for that. So thanks for listening to episode 922 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.